Hello everyone, and welcome back to Chapter 13 of our ISCI course. This lecture is going to be over urbanization and solid and hazardous waste in the United States and as well around the world. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So what is urbanization and why is it a big deal to sustainability? Why do we care about it? So what is urbanization? So urbanization is the trend for humans to build urban cities, to move from rural areas into large cities, one concentrated area with lots of people, and then build that city up. So urban growth kind of thing. So the growth of cities is urbanization. And when we as humans build cities, these cities bring with them lots of challenges, which is what we'll talk about in this lecture. So the number of cities across the world are growing. The size of these cities are growing, as well as the number of people that live in these particular cities. So all of that stuff goes together. So the more people that live there, the bigger the cities need to be. And then the bigger the cities are, the more people they can hold. So it's kind of a compounding effect. And also, as cities grow, things become more expensive inside of those cities, which can lead to an increase in poverty for the people who lived in that area to begin with before the city began to grow and things began to become more expensive. They can't leave the area, they're kind of stuck there. So they have to either adapt or become homeless or something like that. So problems with urbanization don't just necessarily deal with animals, it's a human problem as well. So these are some of the big cities across the globe. I mean, you can really see where they're found. What most people would consider, quote unquote, the developed world, or land that's not free, or land that's usable. You can see the vast majority of this is deserts that don't have cities on them, the big lights, or ice caps like Greenland or Antarctica, or the big deserts in the Sahara or Australia that lack light. Siberia is the same way. There's not a lot of cities in Siberia. But you can see that a lot of the main cities and hubs and things are quite large. In fact, they're so big you can see the light from them from space, which is what these pictures represent, and where they're clustered at around the world. They're clustered around large rivers. You can see in Egypt, the Nile right there literally is just highlighted in light because it's the only place where water is at. They follow big rivers, they follow mountain ranges, and there's a reason for that. So you can see here in India, the Himalayas cut off the lights right there from Mongolia, Nepal, and places over there, China. So you can kind of see where the large cities are, where urbanization trends are going. So these cities are just going to get larger as humanity grows. So most people in the 1800s and prior to that, cities weren't really a thing. They did exist, but most people lived out in the rural areas. They had small farms, or they lived on large plantations or things like that if they were wealthier. But most average people lived on small little family farms, and they may have just had them and their wife and their children to work the farm. But as the economy has gotten less agrarian based and more production based, and people have started to move away from that style of life towards cities. And now we see a lot of people living in cities. More people live in cities than people in rural areas, which is kind of an odd thing. And when people move to the cities, the suburbs become a thing as well. So the suburbs, the areas that were once around that city that would have once been considered rural, as the city grows outwards, those rural areas now become a little more developed, a little more highfalutin, if you like, and then they are now considered suburbs or a smaller part of that city. So it's not just a problem with the cities growing; it's as they grow, the smaller towns around them become part of that city kind of thing. So you can see here some of the big cities. A lot of them are where we originally came in this country. It makes sense. The European settlers and the Americans landed here, and that's where most of our big city hubs are going to be. Very quickly, this part of the world was settled, and then there's not a lot in between here. But you can kind of see where the big cities are in the United States. Most of these things started out as little, small, little, tiny, 5 or 6 street cities. when they were founded, and now they have massive cities, which the sprawl of these things take up, counties, which is pretty crazy. Or in this case, almost a quarter of the state. LA almost half, maybe. A third of the state. Los Angeles takes up just the sprawl and cities of San Francisco and Los Angeles and all the other cities that live are people in cities that are found in California in that area. So, why does the United States have such a problem with this? Why are other countries not? They've already kind of had this problem. They don't have a lot of land. It's very close together in Europe. They can take a bus, a taxi from place to place. They don't really have the need for cars and spreading out things. But in the United States, we have a lot of land. And as everyone knows, the United States is number one. We like to take advantage of the fact that we have the most land and the best land, and we're going to use every square inch of it that we can. So instead of building a nice tall apartment building, we'll build a nice big giant wide one and give everybody really big rooms with lots of extra space. So that's what we do here. Our land was super cheap at one point in time. You could just literally just walk in and just buy it for nothing. Parts of the country, and you can still do that in other parts of them. We have cars here. Cars are cheap. Cars are plentiful. In fact, it's kind of a right when you turn 16 to get a driver's license. Now, in other countries, that's not a thing. Driver's license costs thousands of dollars. They're extremely difficult to get. So they ride bikes everywhere. They take Ubers, or they take the subway. They don't need cars. Their cities are laid out significantly better than ours, where you can take a taxi from one side of the town to the other, and it costs you $5. Or you have a subway that runs from East Nashville to West Nashville, and you can get there the whole way without having to ever need a car. But here you can't do that. It's a little way more difficult here to do that. When Nashville doesn't even have a subway system. But everybody has a car. Everything's really far apart because we have very little suburban planning. We don't put things in central areas. We'll put shopping centers here and then groceries over here instead of putting them next door where people could just walk. And the apartments are way across where instead of people being close together. And our streets are just kind of haphazardly laid down because at one point in time we just had so much land that it didn't really matter. You can just kind of put a road wherever you want. And now we're kind of paying the price for that. Gasoline's still super cheap at this point in time, $2-3 a gallon, expensive, but it could be $6 or $7, which is what's been found in other countries for regular times, for quite a long period of time. So we have relatively cheap gasoline here, and all of this stuff allows the United States and the people that live here to not really have to worry about how expensive it is to get to work, or if it's going to cost me $15 to drive to the gas station across the way, or the grocery store across the town. Instead, if they did, they might go, oh, that's really expensive. It's $70 to drive my car 5 miles across the street. I got to pay to park there. Gas is super expensive and things like that, where you find in Europe. And then people bike. So that's kind of an easier way to do. You don't have the cities with full of cars and things like that. So there's different factors that come up with this. So when we as humans move into this, our cities grow. The land and the biodiversity in the area that they were once that was once there is gone. You can't grow crops there anymore. The wilderness that was once there is gone once the houses and cities are built. Any forest or grasslands or habitat for animals is now gone as well. We may leave ponds in the middle, but that's that habitat fragmentation. Nothing's going to be able to move to the middle of the city if there's no trees to connect it and things like that. So they just have a big habitat fragment in the middle. So cities are not particularly great for that. It's going to take a whole lot more water to power a city. You have to, feed or water and wash the people that live there. You have to wash the cars that are there. You have to wash the windows of the city. You have to keep the city clean. And when that happens, or when we go in and we get rid of all the ground soil and the topsoil and things like that, and we put it with concrete, water's not going to go into concrete. It's just going to pool, and then it's going to run somewhere. So instead of the water being absorbed by the ground, it just sits on the surface, and then it has to go somewhere. So it runs into collection pools and create floods and things like that. So not the best way to handle this. When we build cities, it's going to have drastic effects on the air and the quality of life for the people that are found there. Cars sitting around at red lights, pumping out exhaust fumes all day long. It sinks, it's heavy, and the buildings hold it in. If you were in a big giant field, you have a big giant open grassland and air to get rid of all of that exhaust fumes to disperse it into the atmosphere. But in the city, it just sinks and it sits there, and it's held in by all the buildings. There's not a lot of movement of breeze and air in the cities, and when compared to open fields and things like that, land. And carbon dioxide and other pollutants and things from cars tend to pile up in cities, and the people that are there breathe that stuff in, and that's kind of a downstream effect of that, as well as the health problems that go with that. It takes a lot of energy to power cities. One little small self-sustaining farm out in the middle of nowhere versus a city that has no farms to sustain anyone. It's going to take a lot more energy to sustain that city, in both producing food, producing the energy to power the city, all the lights and sirens and things that go on all the time throughout the city. All that stuff takes energy, gasoline or coal-powered power plants and things like that. So the energy to power these cities is costly as well. And then the economic effects of that from just people is there tends to be more unemployment in central cities. Once again, very high rent, very high priced apartments, very high end businesses that the people that were originally there that might not be as qualified for those particular positions that could originally afford it now can't. So they either have to go somewhere else or they just stay there and become homeless, and that's essentially what happens. And then small towns and rural areas tend to feel the effects of urbanization as people move from these small towns, they move into the cities. Those small towns lose their livelihood, lose their populations, and then the small towns tend to decline and they can die as well. So that's another effect from that. But there are some good things that occur from urbanization. Cities are a wonderful thing in the sense of having everybody in one spot allows for great opportunity. There's tons of jobs in there. There's tons of job opportunities for education. You can have colleges that spring up. Lots of people working together to build new products, innovation. Collectivization of people and ideas in one place can lead to great progress being made. There also tends to be access to healthcare. Bigger the city, the better quality of the healthcare that tends to be there, and the more options of it that are found. And that's always a good thing. The more options and access to healthcare that people have, the more likely they are to take advantage of that and therefore care for their own health and their family's health as well. And then in cities, cities that are aware of the problems that urbanization bring can work around to try to figure out something to do to prevent those problems. They can either plan accordingly when they make their city or when they expand their city. They can accommodate preserving biodiversity without fragmenting habitats, or maybe leaving a lake in place or something like that. Or they can fund recycling programs, which should be an international thing anyway, which we'll talk about in a second. So characteristics of cities. Pretty much every city on the planet, they have excessively huge environmental footprints. Small city, it takes way more land and way more energy than the amount of space that particular city occupies and could produce to power them. So just because the city occupies a quarter of the state of California, it probably needs way more than a quarter of the state of California's worth of resources to power the people that live there, and then to power the energy that takes the city to run in the form of lights and things like that as well. So huge ecological footprints that cities require. It's often just concrete. There's not a lot of trees. That causes problems with pollutions. Animals don't have habitats, so the lack of green things is a big deal as well. Just a concrete jungle. It holds in heat, all kinds of stuff. Water problems, I already mentioned that one. Water pools on concrete, not a good thing. Concentrated pollution and health problems, I already mentioned that one. The pollution sinks and people breathe it in. Cities are loud. You've been to Nashville before, or another major large city, and you've heard the car horns and the sirens and the people and the music. They're loud. Animals have problems with that. Animals did not evolve in loud worlds. Their world was not loud like that when they evolved. That's a recent human thing in the last maybe couple hundred years at the very most. So those loud noises can also have effect on not just the animals in the sense that it drives them away, it scares them, it can mess up their nocturnal patterns or sleep patterns and things like that. It does the same thing to us. We're not evolved either to deal with these loud noises and things like that. So sleep patterns, bright lights, and things can be disrupted, causing by those problems of living in the city. And then light pollution, like I just mentioned, it disrupts sleep patterns. Climate effects, the cities hold in heat, which they release the heat at night, which can raise the temperature of the area, which can cause local warming in those particular areas. And then animals, they get that light from the cities, and it causes birds to migrate improperly, and things like that can have some weird effects on animals that travel at night or that are used to sleeping during the night. Now they find themselves in a brightly lit city. So here's a couple of more problems. The input of cities, energy comes in, food, water, raw materials, manufactured goods, money, and information come into the cities. And then things that leave the cities, you can see on the other side, are solid waste products, which we'll talk about in a minute. Heat, never a great thing. Air pollutants, water pollutants, greenhouse gases, different types of manufactured goods, noises, wealth, and then ideas. So some good things, some bad. And we'll kind of dig a bit into those, the ones that we haven't already. So if you're poor and you live in the city, or you live anywhere and you're poor, life is a kind of a struggle to survive. But in cities, it's even worse, because it's not like in the rural areas where you can kind of stake a claim, or go sleep out in the woods or make yourself a cabin or something. There really isn't a place to do that in the city. You just kind of sleep on the sidewalk or on a bench or something like that. And when that happens, they often lack access to clean facilities and things to clean themselves, brush their teeth, and just keep themselves clean. Which and then they're also sleeping on the streets, which are full of the high levels of air pollutants and things, toxins and pollutants from oil that comes off people's cars, gasoline and things like that, other chemicals that people use in cities and things. So that's a question of what governments can do, is a question of ethics or your political leanings, which are kind of neither here nor there for this class. So cities can grow upwards or outwards, and it really just depends on the type of transportation that the city and the country and place are used to. Places like the United States, Canada, Australia, we have a lot of land. Our land is wide, it's open, it's flat. It's easy to drive or ride a horse from place to place, particularly the drive in this day and age. So the need to build cities up, in the sense of big tall buildings, wasn't particularly there. We could just drive from place to place or ride a horse from place to place, and everybody could live far apart. Everybody could have their own space, and then the idea of American individualism and all that stuff comes in again. Everybody wants their own place. So we have lots of cars. We've always had that idea of this is mine, this is yours. We're going to keep them separate and by a distance. We don't want to live on top of people. So we design our cities and our urban environments around cars, which make things have to be wider, farther apart to accommodate roads and things like that, to accommodate parking spaces and things like that. In other countries where they have mass transit systems, like subways and things like that, they build up. So they understand that the need to move cities outward. Cities have a limited space, and particularly in these places, Japan is an island. There's not a lot of space you can take up if you run out. Hong Kong sits on sits on the ocean, so you run out of sea. You run out of a shoreline at one point. So these cities build upwards. They don't build out; they build straight up, and that allows them to keep everything kind of concentrated together. They have mass transit systems for people to move around, where they don't have that need for cars. They can get from one side of the city to the other using a subway or something like that. Instead of us, where we don't have a subway, we have to have a car to get from one side of the city to the other. So different planning techniques, different types of transportation really matter when it comes to planning cities and the environmental impacts that different cities have. Big outward building cities have a greater impact than upward building cities. Cars are handy. Everybody loves their cars. It's convenient. You don't have to wait for subway. You can get around really easy. It keeps people jobs from driving delivery vehicles or building cars, fixing cars, things like that, building car parts, all kinds of stuff with the advantages of having cars. But cars are not necessarily the best thing on the planet. If you've ever sat at a red light and sat there and sat there and sat there for 3 or 4 minutes and looked around, and then there's no one coming for the entire time for either direction. You have to sit there for 4 minutes when you could easily just go. All you're doing is just burning gasoline, producing pollution for absolutely no reason whatsoever, other than the fact that that's a red light. So the way that we handle cars is extremely poor in this country. Cars sit 90% of their lives for the most part when they're not in a garage. They're driving, and then they just sit in traffic. If they sit at a red light, they sit at a stop sign, and all of this stuff just burns gasoline and produces air pollution for no reason whatsoever. And which all that stuff could be prevented if people knew how to use roundabouts and keep people moving instead of sitting at stop signs, or red lights had flashing yellows instead of just solid red. So different ways to get around this, which could be easily fixed. Also, I'm just kind of an impatient driver, so I hate sitting at red lights. But also the use of cars pushes people to build cities outwards. You got cars, you have to build roads, you need a road for a car to move on, and why not build it? Because we got cars. We might as well build a new parking lot or a new place to go. People will go there, so the fact that cars exist kind of makes it easier for people to build places for the cars to go, parking lots, and build things for people to go to, instead of revamping a building that needed to be torn down or was kind of run down, and revamping that one that was already there into something else, because you already have a subway stop there. Now you can just build a new building out somewhere else because people will drive there because we have cars. And then the last one to mention is the fact that tons of people get killed year round by cars, and then thousands and thousands and thousands of animals alone in this country, millions across the globe, are crushed and destroyed, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, by people in cars. And that's really pathetic. We could do better when it comes to this. That's a really good topic of discussion for class. Somebody check out how countries deal with animals and car accidents and how they work around this. So somebody look into that one. We could reduce the use of cars or the dependence on cars simply by charging more for gas, raising parking fees in the areas that people park at, charging toll roads, charging to go on bridges and things like that. This just discourages people to drive. If they have to think about the fact that it's going to cost them $10 to drive to work, they might take a bus instead, or they might take an Uber, and that's just one less car on the road. If it's a rideshare Uber and things like that. And then we can encourage the use and development of other transportation options. Subways, bikes, build bicycle lanes, encourage people to use them. Buses, mass rail transit, things like that. Build ways that lots of people can move from place to place that a lot of people go to popularly, really easily, really cheaply. So we're not having to rely on everybody taking their own car to the mall. Everybody can take one subway to the mall, and that's a lot less energy than cars. Just reduce, make cities smart from here on out. Make them not as car friendly. Build them more mass transit friendly here. Build direct the way that we build upwards instead of outwards. And all that stuff can really help cities become more sustainable in the future, instead of becoming urban wastelands of nothing but concrete and cars that smells like exhaust all the time. So these are a couple ways to do this. Check these out. Good ways to encourage cities and individuals to not build cities, or to build smart cities if they do build them. So check these out. We'll talk about these in class. Really good discussion topics. So cities are built for people too. People live there, not just cars. So people tend to think of the cities as just urban spread, but people live there too. And we really need to start building our cities a little more human friendly and a lot less car friendly. Using more renewable energy in the cities, solar, wind resources. They're there. They have skyscrapers. Stick a windmill on top of one of them. It's easy as can be. It's already up there anyway to collect the wind. That could power part of the building, instead of having to use a coal power plant. Let the city generate its own resources, putting solar panels on all the buildings and things like that. They have solar powered windows. Make those a thing. solar panel windows. So allow the city to do as much of its own energy production as it can. And that would be a great start to allow people to healthily live in the city more than having to have a big giant fuel production coal burning power plant out of town that's going to pump their city full of coal fumes. Have the city produce the energy via solar or wind or something like that. And then cities can encourage people to reduce and reuse and recycle. Add recycling to the monthly garbage pickup or the weekly garbage pickup. Add recycling. That should be a thing that's found in every city across this planet. Your taxes should pay for that. I don't understand why I don't have free recycling that's provided by the city every single time they come to pick up my garbage. I don't understand that. We should encourage that very, very highly. It should be free. It should be easy. And that's just weird to me. We can protect the cities that are there we can protect the environments that are also found inside of those cities by encouraging cities not to build on them. If there's a unique habitat that's found near a city or a lake or something like that, or a pond, encourage the city to build that, or to build that into a park or something like that to preserve it the way it is and not build cities on it. We can promote the use of building urban gardens, and that's a very cool thing, to promote green spaces, to promote the use of growing your own food and things like that inside of cities, instead of just having them as barren wastelands of energy sucking, resource sucking, of concrete. They can produce something back for themselves, which is a great thing. Somebody check out Brazil. This particular city, Curitiba in Brazil, did a really great job of pretty much setting the standard of what cities should strive for on making a city a good, sustainable city for the future. So, hazardous waste and solid waste. So, humans, when we do things, our waste products from just making things or consuming things have to go somewhere, and we throw away thousands of pounds and millions of pounds of useful things daily. Yourself might throw away plastic bottles or concrete aluminum cans or tin cans and things like that, steel cans, and all that stuff might seem minuscule if you throw away just one of them, but you're not the only one doing that. And eventually what will happen is we'll have to start mining landfills for metal, which is going to be interesting in resources once we deplete the earth of it, because it's going to be the greatest sources of it. There's so many aluminum cans, so many steel cans, and other things thrown in landfills that you can get a bunch of it out of there. But solid waste products, when we produce them, there's a lot of different forms of them. There's industrial solid waste, municipal solid waste, and then there's hazardous solid waste, which is sometimes referred to as toxic waste. And all of this stuff has to go somewhere. And there's a lot of reasons why we need to fix this, other than the fact that some of them are toxic. It's just kind of a waste. We could fix that. We could just recycle our aluminum can instead of throwing it away, and not waste the resources that are in the planet. So somebody has to go dig more aluminum out of the earth and melt it down and things like that. And then just the energy production of doing that in the first place causes a lot of pollution, of having to go mine things, produce new plastics and things like that. The pollution that's caused by that to the air and the environment is another good reason to encourage that, as well as some of these toxic waste are polluting themselves. So it's another thing that we worry about. The United States produces a ton of solid waste, way more than most other countries. Somebody do a good research on this one. We'll talk about this one in class, another good research thing. Electronic waste, e-waste is a huge deal. Computers, batteries, cell phones, tablets, things like that. They don't last forever, and when they break, they have to go somewhere. And a lot of people just kind of throw them in the garbage and things like that. When you do that, the lithium and the mercury and all the other chemicals inside of the batteries will leach out into the environment as those laptops get crushed at the landfill, or the water gets into them and the battery breaks down and things like that. Some countries dump all these electronic waste products into the ocean, and then all of those fun things leach out into the water, which then can cause problems with the fish, and then people that consume the fish get those toxins as well. So lots of problems that are associated with e-waste. Maybe a good discussion topic for class. So dealing with solid waste is a fun thing. The easiest answer is just reduce. You can bury it, you can burn it, you can throw it in the ocean, but that doesn't really get rid of it. It just changes it around from place to place or form to form. And that releases toxins and pollutants back into the environment when we burn things. Burying it just leaves it there for a long time. So the best way to deal with this is just reduce the amount of toxic waste, solid waste products that we consume or that we throw away without doing something useful with. And that's what the recycling concept is. So instead of just wasting, excess cans and things like that, just throwing them away, have them recycled. Or instead of, just throwing away chemicals and things that industry uses, clean it and reuse it again. Or waste products that food industries produce, compost it instead of just throwing it away. Lots of different useful things that we can do to help deal with the waste products that we as humans produce, especially in these large cities. A couple of different other good ways to help cities cut back on the use of solid waste, or the production of solid waste, I should say. Check these out. These are really good discussion products. A lot of them make sense. Reduce unnecessary packaging. How many of you guys have gotten Amazon packages? You open it up and it's one thing this big in a box that's that big with 18 things of the little protected air packages that are made of plastic. So that's a little unnecessary. So things like that. A couple of the rest of these we've talked about a little bit. Check these out. These will be good discussion topics for class. What can we as individuals do? Check these out. We'll talk about these as well. Recyclable and reusable things. Another wonderful thing. Reusable water bottles, reusable paper bags, or the cloth bags and things. All these stuff are wonderful. They have pros, they have cons, and we'll chat about some of these in class as well. There's two types of recycling when it comes to dealing with the waste that we produce. There's primary recycling, which is taking aluminum, making aluminum cans with it, and then there's a little extra aluminum left over. The cans that are gotten messed up or misprinted or something like that, they're just remelted down and turned into another aluminum can. So that's a closed loop recycling system. Aluminum becomes a can kind of thing. It stays what it is. And then there's secondary recycling, which is when you have things like a tire or wood, Christmas trees and things, that they can't become a Christmas tree again. You can't make a tire into another tire, but you can make it into something else. You can grind up Christmas trees and make mulch with it. You can grind up tires and make padding for playgrounds. That's the stuff that they use on playgrounds. Soft rubber playground padding. They make welcome mats with ground up tires and things like that. All kinds of useful stuff. They make out of recycled tires. And then there's post-consumer and pre-consumer waste that's generated that can also be recycled. Pre-consumer would be the aluminum can example. The factory that produces aluminum cans messes some of them up, and they just melt them down and recycle them again. And then there's post-consumer, which can also be aluminum cans. But these are when you get the aluminum cans from the store, you drink them, and then you recycle those. That's post-consumer recycling. So both different types of recycling are very important for maintaining the dealing or not producing too many solid waste products and preserving the resources that we have, because they are finite. We can't go make more aluminum once it's gone. Once we've mined it all, we've mined it all. You can't go make more of it, kind of thing. So we can encourage people to recycle by lots of different ways. We can separate the household recycling waste and have you do it, or we can have places that do this. And the different approaches of those have different benefits and different things. If someone is forced to recycle their own recycling, there's less work for the other end. It's not going to cost as much. It's not resource heavy. You don't need facilities to do this, but it might be done incorrectly, and it's going to discourage a lot of people from recycling. I don't want to do it. I do. I don't want to. It's aggravating. But it does discourage people from doing that, and I completely understand it. Or we could build facilities that deal with this and recycling, sorting the recycling for us. But when they do that, it can increase or encourage people just to throw away stuff that they might not otherwise toss. So you've got some cans in a trash can that are recyclable. I just throw the whole trash bag away. And when they do that, the whole thing has to be thrown away. They're not going to waste the time and the effort to dig out one little empty trash bag, or one trash bag's full of trash from a load of plastics. They're going to dump the whole thing in the trash. It's not worth it to them. So when that happens, when their recyclings are contaminated by regular garbage, they just toss it. You have to have big facilities to do this. It costs time, it costs money, it costs resources to pay someone else to sort recycling. So there are costs and benefits to both of those. Recycling plastics. Somebody dig into this one. Is it really worth recycling plastics? The answer to that one is a little slightly surprising. Nature does the best job at recycling of anybody else. There are things that nature can't recycle, like our plastics, but we've started to figure out ways to do this, and nature can eventually break down our plastics. It just takes a really long time. But nature composts things using bacteria, and different types of organisms to break things down, fungus and stuff. And we can do the same thing. Our solid waste products in the form of food and waste like that we produce, biological waste and things, we can break down with bacteria, fungus, and things. And when they break it down, they produce very nutrient-rich fertilizer that then humans can use for other things. We can use it to restore, topsoil that's been depleted by the cities. You can sell it for fertilizer. You can use it in landfills, which we'll talk about in a second. So lots of different things that treated and composted soil can be used for. Recycling has advantages and disadvantages that I talked about as well. It's very costly to recycle things, but it does save us resources. It creates jobs. So different things. Here's some more. Let's talk about this in class. How do we encourage people to recycle? What are some things that you might want implemented to recycle, to encourage you to recycle? What are some of the reasons why you might not recycle? And what could we do to fix this? Landfills. You can burn solid waste. A lot of places do that. But a lot of places just bury it. And we are one of them. There's two different types of landfills. You're probably familiar with these. You have something called a dump, or an open dump, and a sanitary landfill. And an open dump is exactly what it sounds like. They literally just walk out into a big field somewhere and they throw garbage in there, and that's it. Us in the United States, we haven't been able to have those since 1997. Sanitary landfills are highly managed. They're controlled. They have to be, laid down in a certain way. They're regulated how they're controlled. They have to be put with a soil over them. They have to have certain amounts of collecting of tarps that can collect leaks and things like that, to prevent leaks and stuff from getting into this groundwater. So lots of different regulations that come with these sanitary landfills, and overall they're pretty good, but there are some problems with them as well. So let's talk about that one in class, some of the problems that can come with sanitary landfills. Obviously they're less harmful than just an open dump, as you can probably understand. Obviously the easiest way is to just produce less of these things. Hazardous waste, things like lead, nuclear waste, and things like that. We have to get rid of those as well. So just producing less of those is even better. Getting rid of toxic and hazardous waste products is very difficult. Most times it's just buried. You can burn it, you can destroy it with chemicals, but when you do that, it tends to release some sort of other toxic byproduct. Things that are toxic tend to remain toxic or hazardous, no matter what you do to them for the most part, unless it's very costly or takes a really long time. So hazardous waste that humans produce, not the easiest things to get rid of. And we actually have quite a lot of hazardous waste in our house that you are not legally allowed to just throw away. You're not supposed to just throw batteries away in the trash can. They have mercury in them, cadmium in them. And when those batteries degrade in the landfill, the mercury and cadmium leaches out, and that can get into the groundwater, which causes severe birth defects for people and animals and things like that. Gasoline, motor oil, antifreeze, weed killer, roach killer, all the stuff that you have in your house, wood paint, wood thinners, paint thinners, all that stuff is toxic. And if you pour it down the drain or into the grass or anything like that, and it's not disposed of properly, it has some severe problems that can come with that, because those chemicals are toxic. And when they get into the groundwater, the soil, and things like that, animals and humans that consume that can get that toxic substance inside of them, and then they can have some severe problems as well. So here's some things that you individually can do to reduce your hazardous waste output, or to properly handle dealing with hazardous waste. So we'll talk about some of these in class. A couple of things that the United States has done to help encourage the protective handling of hazardous waste, and clean up of hazardous waste and things like that. A lot of the things come down to getting these waste sites cleaned up, or preventing these hazardous waste, things like that, because people don't really want them in their backyard. Nobody wants a hazardous waste collection site or a hazardous waste dump or something like that in their backyard. But it does happen. And a lot of the times the communities can band together to prevent that. But a lot of the times the communities where they tried to put these things don't necessarily have the resources or the means to fight it in court. They tend to pick poor rural communities to put these toxic waste, hazardous waste collection sites or production sites, because they don't think these people will be educated enough or have the money or the resources to be able to fight it. So it's another fun little downside of being less wealthy. International treaties have been formed to help produce, or to help control the production of these hazardous waste across the world. Lots of other things that we can do to help control the production of hazardous waste and things like that. This is some things that we as humans do that produce way too much excess energy, way too much waste product and things like that. And all of these waste products have to be dealt with at some form in time, either by humanity or by the environment. And when the environment does it, it's not that good. It can have severe side effects. And when we do it, we can often prevent things from getting out of hand, or do this cleaner or more efficiently, or in a shorter time period than nature itself could do. So these are a couple of the things that produce waste, and then what those waste products can be used for, where they go, to help prevent them just being tossed out in the world again, out into the environment. So this is really the end I've got for all I've got for this lecture. These are the 3 big ideas that we'll go over in class of how to reduce urbanization, what it is, and things like that. How to control the production of hazardous waste and things like that in our world. So if you have any questions or anything else over this, or if you just want me to expand on anything, please feel free to send me an email. If not, we'll talk about a lot of this stuff in lecture. Have a great rest of your day, and come prepared with some good discussion questions and topics for lecture.